This is the story of how a single announcement on January 31st, 2026 changed everything for Joel Embiid, Paul George, and the Philadelphia 76ers playoff push. Paul George, the 9-time All-Star who signed a 4-year, $212 million contract just 7 months earlier, has been suspended 25 games without pay for violating the NBA's anti-drug program, and with the trade deadline just 5 days away, the Sixers now face their most critical decision of the season. What happened, what it means financially, and whether Philadelphia can still make a legitimate playoff run without one of their key stars alongside Joel Embiid is what we're breaking down right now. Saturday, January 31st brought a bombshell announcement from NBA Commissioner Adam Silver's office. George would serve a 25-game suspension without pay, starting immediately for violating the league's anti-drug program, though the specific substance was never disclosed by the league. Through ESPN's Shams Charania, George released a statement that acknowledged the mistake and highlighted the growing mental health in sports conversation. Over the past few years, I've discussed the importance of mental health, and in the course of recently seeking treatment for an issue of my own, I made the mistake of taking an improper medication, he said, adding that he takes full responsibility and apologized to the Sixers organization, his teammates and Philly fans for poor decision-making during the process. The NBPA, National Basketball Players Association, has been pushing for expanded mental health resources, making George's situation part of a larger sports wellness dialogue. The 25-game length reveals something about the violation. Under NBA policy, this indicates George's first offense, which means he won't be eligible to return until March 25, 2026, when the Sixers host the Chicago Bulls, a date that's now circled on every Philadelphia fan's calendar. That March 25th return against Chicago leaves just 10 regular season games for him to play before the playoffs begin. And the timing creates a nightmare scenario for Philadelphia. Sitting at 26 and 21 and 6th place in the Eastern Conference when the suspension hit, the Sixers were only 2.5 games behind the second seed, but also just 3.5 games ahead of 10th place, which meant every single game mattered in a conference this tight. George's $51.7 million salary this season translates to serious money lost. Across 25 games, he'll forfeit approximately $11.7 million, which breaks down to $469,691.72 per game walking out the door. But here's where the situation gets interesting for the organization. Luxury tax savings of more than $5 million come with the suspension, dropping the team from about $7 million over the luxury tax threshold down to just $1.26 million over. With the NBA's new first apron and second apron restrictions affecting team flexibility, this financial relief becomes even more valuable. ESPN's Bobby Marks laid out the implications cleanly. Philadelphia will save more than $5 million in luxury tax payments as part of George's suspension, leaving the team a little over $1 million over the threshold and making it easier for the 76ers to dip out of the tax this week without harming the roster. That timing matters because the trade deadline arrives February 5th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, just 5 days after the suspension announcement. GM Daryl Morey suddenly has significantly more flexibility in how he approaches the deadline thanks to the financial relief. Understanding what the Sixers are losing requires looking at what George was actually providing this season. Through 27 games, George averaged 16 points per game on 38.2% shooting from three-point range, making him the team's third leading scorer behind Tyrese Maxey at 29.4 points and Joel Embiid at 25.7 points. Days before the suspension dropped, he put up 32 points with 9 three-pointers against Milwaukee, showing he still had something left in the tank. Those aren't superstar numbers for a guy making over $51 million. But head coach Nick Nurse pointed out what the stats don't capture. "I know people have mixed feelings about what he brings to the table," Nurse said, before adding that you can't replace what George does because he does everything for the team. Defensively, probably their best perimeter defender, and offensively, he can play so many roles from knocking down shots to post left everyone wondering if the signing had been a mistake. This season started differently. George stayed healthier, shot better from three, and the team won games with him on the floor, going 16-11 with him in the lineup compared to 10-10 without him. Now they'll need to prove they can maintain that level without their $51 million wing for the next 2 months. If there's a silver lining for Philadelphia, it's that Joel Embiid picked the perfect time to catch fire. The 7-time All-Star is putting up 26.2 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 3.9 assists per game this season. but in January alone, he averaged 29.7 points, 8.4 rebounds, and 4.6 assists over 14 games. Stretching back to his last 16 games heading into the suspension, those numbers climbed to 29.3 points, 7.9 rebounds, and 4.6 assists. The night the suspension was announced, Embiid dropped a season-high 40 points against the Pelicans in a 124-114 win, and a few days earlier, he put up 37 against Sacramento. When Embiid played in January, the Sixers went 10-4, but without him, they were 0-3, which tells you everything about his value to this team. What's interesting is that despite this excellent play, Embiid was not selected as an all-star reserve when the announcement came on February 1st. His performance suggests he's playing some of the best basketball of his career at exactly the right time. But the question becomes whether he can sustain this for another 2 months while carrying an even heavier load without George. Philadelphia isn't just a two-man team anymore, which might save them during this suspension. Tyrese Maxey, who signed a 5-year, $203.8 million extension in 2024, is having a breakout year by leading the team with 29.4 points per game and earning his first All-Star starter selection. Maxey has blossomed into a star guard with speed, scoring ability, and playmaking that makes him one of the league's most dynamic young players. But the real surprise has been rookie VJ Edgecombe, and his emergence could change everything for how the Sixers handle George's absence. The third overall pick in the 2025 draft out of Baylor is averaging 15.1 points, 5.3 rebounds, and 4.2 assists through about 41 games, making him the third highest scoring rookie in the league at 15.4 points per game, and he earned a spot in the Rising Stars Challenge at All-Star Weekend. In the Rookie of the Year race, only 2 rookies this season are averaging 15 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists, and those are Edgecombe and Cooper Flagg, with Edgecombe's all-around impact potentially giving him an edge over Flagg's pure scoring. For a 20-year-old who played just 1 season of college basketball, that's remarkable production, and the organization considers him potentially untouchable in trade discussions, which tells you how much they value his development. With George out, Edgecombe will likely see even more minutes and opportunities, and this suspension might actually accelerate his growth into a foundational piece for Philadelphia's future. Here's where things get complicated for Daryl Morey and the front office. Just 1 day before the suspension was announced, ESPN's Tim Bontemps and Brian Windhorst reported that the feeling around the league was that the Sixers weren't looking to do anything significant at the deadline, that a blockbuster wasn't likely, and the team expected to focus on around-the-edges roster matters. Then the suspension hit, and everything changed overnight. The Sixers now have to decide whether they stand pat and ride it out with their current roster, make small moves to add depth, or pivot to a more aggressive approach. Once George is officially placed on the suspended list after their February 7th game against Phoenix, they can sign a replacement player, and they also have a $5.8 million tax variance credit, which is half of George's salary during the suspension, giving them some financial flexibility. Potential trade targets that have been mentioned in reports include Saddiq Bey from New Orleans, who's making $6.1 million and shooting 34.3% from 3. Guards like Keon Ellis from Sacramento, Ayo Dosunmu from Chicago on a $7.5 million expiring contract, and DeAnthony Melton from Golden State at $3.1 million are also in the mix, along with Bryce Sensabaugh from Utah and Jock Landale from Memphis if they move Andre Drummond. On the outgoing side, they could potentially move players like Quentin Grimes, who's on an $8.7 million expiring deal but has an inherent no-trade clause and is likely staying. Kelly Oubre Jr. is making $8.3 million but having a career best season at 14.4 points and 36.8% from 3, so moving him seems unlikely, while Andre Drummond at $5 million could be a salary dump. Eric Gordon on a veteran minimum is likely to be moved, and Kyle Lowry, also on a minimum, is essentially serving as an additional coach at this point. Defensive rebounding, wing depth, which is now critical with George out, and potential frontcourt help have been identified as the team's biggest needs. But here's the historical context that matters. Daryl Morey has made at least 1 trade at every deadline since joining the Sixers in 2020, and his pattern often involves salary-slashing moves to avoid the luxury tax. With the team now just $1.26 million over that threshold, don't be surprised if he makes a move that gets them under it entirely. The Sixers are also on a 5-game road trip through the deadline, starting Monday in Los Angeles against the Clippers, which adds another layer of complexity to making trades while traveling. The reality of their situation requires looking at both the opportunities and the obstacles ahead. At 26-21 and in 6th place, the Sixers are positioned in an Eastern Conference that's wide open with no dominant team this year. They're close enough to the 2nd seed that a strong February and March could vault them into home court advantage for at least the first round. When George returns on March 25th against the Chicago Bulls, there will be 10 regular season games left, which is enough time for him to get his rhythm back and for the team to establish chemistry before the playoffs begin. They've already shown they can win without him by going 10-10 in games he's missed, and the night of the suspension announcement, they beat New Orleans 124-114. If Embiid stays healthy and continues his January form, if Maxey keeps playing like an all-star, and if Edgecombe continues developing, they have the core to compete. But legitimate concerns exist that can't be ignored. The Sixers haven't advanced past the Eastern Conference semifinals since their 2001 NBA Finals loss to the Los Angeles Lakers, a drought that haunts this franchise. Last season was a disaster, and even this season, with George healthy and playing, they were only 16-11 with him. Depth issues remain a problem. Nick Nurse acknowledged the challenge by saying you get the punch to the gut, but he has to mention that George's statement sparked shows how the league is evolving beyond just wins and losses. But for Philadelphia, the basketball results still matter most. When he returns, he'll have 10 games to prove he can be a difference maker before the playoffs, and then the real question begins about what his future looks like with this franchise. He's under contract through the 2027-28 season with a player option for that final year, making $54.1 million next season and $56.6 million the year after. For a player who's struggled with injuries, missed significant time, and now has this suspension on his record, that's an enormous financial commitment that might haunt the organization. For now, the focus is on this season, but these next few months will define whether the Paul George signing was a success or another expensive mistake in Philadelphia's long, painful quest to build a championship contender around Joel Embiid. The Paul George suspension creates uncertainty at the worst possible time for the Philadelphia 76ers, coming when they're in playoff position but in a conference so tight that a single bad stretch could knock them out entirely. The trade deadline arrives in 5 days with decisions to make about whether to add pieces, subtract salary, or stand pat. Joel Embiid is playing like a superstar, Tyrese Maxey is an all-star starter, and VJ Edgecombe is exceeding expectations as a rookie while competing with Cooper Flagg for Rookie of the Year honors, which means the pieces are there for a legitimate playoff run, but they'll have to prove they can do it without their $51 million wing for the next 25 games. And when George returns on March 25th against the Chicago Bulls, there will be just 10 games to get everything right before the postseason begins. The Sixers' season was already a pleasant surprise after last year's disaster, and now it's a test of depth, coaching, and whether their core three, when finally together, can deliver in the moments that matter most. Because in Philadelphia, anything short of deep playoff success is just another disappointment in a city that's been waiting since that 2001 finals loss to Allen Iverson's Lakers to get back to championship glory.